Welcome back inside the Stingray Show. We just finished up with the Texas Longhorn side of this matchup. Now, let's dive into this matchup from Florida. And like we've been talking about, Heath, this bye week came at a great time because their backs were completely against the wall after some losses and they needed to reset. Here is Graham Hall from 247 Sports the Gators to give us a preview of Florida in this game and moving forward after the bye week. Graham, how were things with you, and how big was the off week for the Florida Gators right now after they were coming off of a horrible performance against Miami?
Well, it couldn't have come at a better time for Florida. Obviously, sitting there at 1-3, not the start that fans and the Florida program envisioned. That loss to USF in week 2 was just a bad taste in Florida's mouth. And you looked at the schedule ahead, that was a critical missed opportunity for Florida to get their first FBS win, build some momentum because they had to go to LSU and then down to Miami and then have that bye week. And now they face Texas and then Texas A&M next week. So you're talking about a team that could be sitting here at 1-5 theoretically at the midpoint of the season. So it was critical for DJ Lagway to continue his development.
Yeah.
We've talked a ton about this, that he was modified during spring camp. He threw a little bit during the summer, then had the calf strain before fall camp, missed much of fall camp there. Didn't really start fully practicing until 12 days before the season, but he wasn't doing every single, like they call it, good on good, 11 on 11 practice session. This past bye week was the first time where every single day throughout the week, he was a full participant in 1v1, 11v11. That was huge for him because if you watch Lagway, there's so much he needs to work on. He looks like a guy who has adjusted his mechanics, still needs to improve his footwork, and most notably needs to improve at reading defenses. And the only way he can do that is by getting valuable practice time and obviously game experience as well. So that's the focal point for Florida because defensively, they've looked good. Those first 2 FBS games, they'd allowed just 2 touchdowns combined. They had Florida in a position there in the second half against Miami to go down and take the lead when it was 13-7. Florida couldn't execute on 4th down, and then Miami scores those 2 touchdowns at the end to make that contest to look a little bit more lopsided than it actually was for the first 3 quarters. So for Florida, so much for them to work on and improve upon, and things that they can do to help DJ Lagway from a play calling standpoint, from an offensive line, technical, and procedural standpoint. You know, the penalties have just shot Florida in the foot. They've hindered drives. They've been unable to execute on 3rd down. They've faced a long field too often at the start of drives. They're coming off a 0 for 13 performance on 3rd down against Miami. You have to be better in that facet of the game. You have to move the chains and you have to establish the run, which that's probably one of the more under the radar surprising things about Florida this year is that they're very high on their backfield contingent of Jaden Baugh and Jacoby Jackson. Jackson will actually miss this Saturday's game, and Duke Clark is going to play a larger role. But they're only running the ball about 44% of the time so far this season, which has kind of been out of character for a Billy Napier offense. They're used to establishing the run, running the ball 60% of the time there. And with a quarterback who has struggled the way Lagway has, you would expect that to be something the Gators lean on a little bit more moving forward, because I think that it's going to give them a really good chance. And last year at Texas, they had more than 200 yards rushing on the ground. So this is a chance for Florida's rushing attack to get going, even without their number 2 running back in Jacoby Jackson. They're going to have to find some ways to take some of the pressure off Lagway, just given what he's dealing with so far.
So we saw this past weekend that Arkansas went on ahead and pulled the trigger and let Sam Pittman go. How concerned should Billy Napier be that if they continue this downward spiral that he could be next?
Well, if he's concerned, I'll give him some credit. He's not showing it. He's not focused on his job security as much as what his job security is related to, which is Florida's on-field performance. I mean, he understands he doesn't need the outside narrative to inform him that he's in a precarious position here and may not see out the end of his 4th season at Florida. they understand that their results have to be better. And if you have better results, you're going to give yourself some breathing room and have a chance to continue developing the players and building the program up the right way, which, to Napier's credit, in my opinion, he's done a really good job at everything outside the in-game coaching. And obviously people are going to judge you by the wins and losses, and that's just the reality of the business. But everything else has been, impressive in my mind. They've retained talent. They've landed players in the portal and via the recruiting trail. They have fielded a good defense. He's made adjustments to the coaching staff outside of the offensive play calling. It's just the in-game results that have people calling for him, especially in Gainesville, to no longer be Florida's head coach. So to answer the question, if Florida can't get a victory this weekend, if they falter next week at Texas A&M, I would think that a change is going to swiftly be on the horizon. Now, when that happens is anyone's guess. You're still not halfway through the season. I understand Arkansas, their situation, but Sam Pittman had been there for 6 years. This was building to that much sooner than just this season. And the same can be said for Napier, knowing that this isn't just this year's results are disappointing. Go back to last season. They start 1-2. You have people calling for him to no longer be the head coach before he's finished his third season. In my opinion, in this era of college football, that is too soon, given all the changes, the adjustments that coaches have to deal with, and how competitive the SEC just is in general. I mean, you got teams like Vanderbilt and Mississippi State that are able to beat ranked teams, and that wasn't the case a couple of years ago. So this is obviously a difficult conference, and Florida desperately needs a win, or else Billy Napier, he can see the writing on the wall that there's going to be a change that more than likely will happen. Again, when that is going to be, if Florida waits until the second bye week before facing Georgia, I could see a situation like that. But if they don't look competitive on Saturday, if they struggle on the road against Texas A&M, maybe they make a change before homecoming on October 18th against Mississippi State. That would make a ton of sense to me. But these next two games are going to decide how long Billy Napier is in Gainesville, in my opinion.
Graham, two quick questions since we're talking about coaching. I keep hearing this year in and year out, and it's more and more of a trend, and we've seen it happen already this year. Arkansas is one of the examples. Well, we got to get our name out there to let everybody know we need a head coach. We need to get – I'm like, we live in a society where 18 minutes ago is old news. Like, what are we doing here? I understand, and a great example of this would be Mississippi State a couple of years ago. When they had Zach Arnett, like they said, there was no juice in the program. We had to make a move. This was completely pathetic. But there was only 2 games left in the season. Now we're firing coaches in September. Like, we got to get out front. We got to get out front. If you're going to make a hire in October, I get getting out front. But that's never the case. This hire's not going to be done until December. Your thoughts on the silliness, if you don't think it's silly, that's fine. I'll let you talk and let you have your opinion. But your thought on this of what is the benefit of letting a coach go? If your program's dead, I get it. You need a little juice. I got that. But if they're barely losing or they're trying to make things happen, I understand. I don't understand of letting a coach go so early and talk about that from the Florida perspective. Would it be something where like, hey, we've got to let Billy go that he's lost the team, or, hey, let's let him finish out the season. We'll make the call here the first week of December.
Yeah, that's a great point about first off, let me answer that and say that I do agree with you that firing a coach in September or even early October, barring some controversy, off-field incident, losing the locker room in this day and age just feels premature to me. I understand that people operate, especially at Florida, with the mindset that if you're going to do something, you do it as soon as possible. But in this era of college football, especially, all these coaching discussions are happening behind the scenes. They're talking to agents, they're fielding interest. You don't need to have an opening necessarily to be having those conversations.
Right.
And for Florida, this is not a situation kind of like Jim McElwain. Jim McElwain, everything fell apart for him so quickly. He had back-to-back years where Florida won the SEC East, was in the SEC championship game. Then you had an off-field controversy leading into his third year. And you had just a situation that became really strained very quickly. And this was before the transfer portal was as prolific as it was. I don't even think the portal was in existence yet. Players still had to sit out a year after they transferred. You had a situation where Jim McElwain came out and made some comments that struck the athletic department as jarring in a sense when he talked about death threats regarding Felipe Franks. You know, Florida had to quickly make a change there, and they had Dan Mullen as a already vetted candidate due to Scott Strickland's prior ties to Mississippi State being the athletic director there. And that allowed them to make that move and put it together rather quickly in the matter of, a couple months. Florida has, dating back to last year, you could make the case since last August that Florida should have a short list of candidates. They've done their research, that they have a short list in mind, that they've vetted personnel, that they've talked to agents. They've had considerable time to get someone in place, figure out what the market is going to look like, and know that regardless of whether Napier is fired in October 19th or whether he's fired November 30th, that you have someone that you already are going to target. And so everything you just said about keeping the locker room intact, trying to keep your players in place for as long as possible so that they're not opting out in the middle of the season. The portal will open if you make a change at head coach for 30 days. Keeping as much talent within Gainesville is certainly a priority. And the other thing is that Billy Napier hasn't lost the locker room. It would be a totally different situation if players were opting out, didn't want to play for him. But once again, for the second straight year, guys are motivated to help turn this thing around. They don't want to be seen as quitters. These are competitors, and calling them a quitter is disrespectful to a lot of these guys. And so that is absolutely, give Florida some credit. They've kept this team intact despite the adversity right here. And until he, quote unquote, loses the locker room or loses respect from players, and I don't think that's going to happen. Players like Billy Napier as a person, as a competitor, and their families especially like players. I know some people hear that and they're like, well, why does that matter? This is still a human sport. And even though we're going to judge it by wins and losses, how highly regarded you are by the families that you are recruiting their sons to come and play for, and all the other factors, just how you operate and carry yourself, that does hold weight still, in my opinion. And that's part of why Florida players and athletic department officials are still high on Billy Napier as a person. And until something changes in that regard or he loses the locker room, I could see a situation, I'm not predicting this, but I could see a situation that even if they're going to make a change, you have him coach out the end of the year. Because Billy Napier, if you ask him what is the most difficult part of Florida's 1-3 start this year and the 1-2 start last year, he'll tell you that it's that the job he's doing is disappointing the players that are putting themselves out there, risking their health every single week. That is the hardest thing for him. And so I could see a situation where he wants to be here as long as possible, even if he knows a change is coming, because he doesn't want to quit on these guys, just like they're not quitting on him.
Mm-hmm. Graham, the second part of my coaching question, and it's a fun one, and we won't stay long on it, and you have a short answer. Got a text late last night. It's a rumor. I have no idea if it's true. I did not chase it. I'm not going to chase it. I'll let someone else confirm it. But Arkansas and Dan Mullen filling each other out to see what each other's interests are. Your thoughts if Dan Mullen comes back to the SEC and that Arkansas gig? Is that a good fit or a bad fit?
Well, it's tough to say whether it's a good fit or a bad fit, because I do think recruiting has changed so much since Dan Mullen was at Florida. You could make the case in both directions that coaches either have less power than they've ever had at landing someone, because you can recruit the heck out of them, identify them early. But if another school comes in with a more competitive NIL offer, you're probably not going to get that kid unless they're going to be willing to sacrifice money. At the same time, if every single team has a very competitive offer, a coach is going to separate themselves. A personality like Dan Mullen is kind of like a Lane Kiffin in a sense, where they're, a walking quote, and you want to play for a guy who just oozes confidence like that. I could absolutely see Dan Mullen being more successful if he has a treasure chest at Arkansas, which is really interesting because Hunter Yurachek, the athletic director's comments the other day that Sam Pittman didn't have the resources he needed to be successful. Is that going to scare off a coach like a Dan Mullen, who already was regarded as not an elite day in and day out, 365 days a year recruiter? If he doesn't have competitive resources and has to work harder and is going to miss out on kids and waste time in a sense when he doesn't have the resources to land them, is that going to be appealing to him? Arkansas needs to come out and say that Dan Mullen will have every resource at his disposal, whether it's Mullen or whether it's Rhett Lashley, whoever is the coach at Arkansas, because that's going to scare away coaches a little bit, knowing that it's going to be their reputation on the line, regardless of whether or not they actually can do the job and land the prospects that they're evaluating and identifying. So I think it's a little bit too soon to predict that Dan Mullen comes back to the SEC. I still think that if I'm an SEC athletic director, I'm looking to see him prove himself a little bit more. He spent the last 3 seasons on the sidelines. The Florida tenure didn't end in a fantastic way. Obviously, I think that's obvious when you get fired from a program. But if I'm a program looking to hire Dan Mullen, I want to see how he does with a full cycle of recruiting. Because look at the roster at UNLV. It's a lot of players that either, I hate to say, not to say washed out, but their careers, they were looking for a change of scenery, and they were guys who, would want to come play for a guy like Dan Mullen. And then you had a lot of players out of that roster that Mullen had recruited at Florida. So I need to see him land a top 15, top 20 recruiting class, even see that he's competitive, is eager to recruit before I'm thinking that I'm bringing him to an SEC program. Because in this day and age, you're not going to just out scheme the other team if you don't have a talent advantage. And for Mullen, the recruiting was a factor, and he needs to show that he can do that before I believe it. But also, with all that said, crazier things have happened. I wouldn't be surprised if we're sitting here next year and talking about Dan Mullen being back in the SEC, because the guy's familiar with the landscape. He wants to coach at the highest level. It would make sense for him, but I don't know how much sense it makes for Arkansas right now.
All right, when we get to the matchup with Texas this weekend, where are you most concerned that Texas can take advantage of the Florida Gators?
Well, it's a talented Texas defense, and you have a struggling quarterback in DJ Lagway who needs to do a better job reading defenses, making decisions, sensing pocket pressure, stepping up in the pocket, working on his footwork. I mean, I've got a laundry list of things that could be issues for Florida's offense against this Texas defense. I also think that you're talking about a Florida defense. Yeah, Arch Manning hasn't been fantastic, and the Longhorns faced arguably one of the worst teams in college football 2 weeks ago. But Florida's defense has taken some hits in the recent weeks. They lost Caleb Banks for potentially, I would probably say probably the remainder of the season after he had surgery after the LSU game. They lost LJ McCray for a while, still not going to make his way back, a guy who was important in the edge room for them. But in the secondary, you're going to be looking at 2 guys having to step into larger roles when you just lost starters at Miami 2 weeks ago. Aaron Gates had shoulder surgery on Wednesday, and Dijon Johnson suffered a season-ending injury. He had a torn meniscus in that loss to Miami. So there's as impressive as Florida's defense has been, there's a belief from outsiders especially that Florida's defense is not going to be able to perform at the rate that they showcased the first 4 weeks of the season. And again, the defense is not the problem. Right. They allowed just 2 touchdowns in the first 3 weeks combined on the season. Are they going to be able to play at the same level? Are they going to be able to win the turnover battle? Are they going to be able to get Florida a short field position to go out and execute? That is a huge question mark in my mind. So there are questions on both sides of the ball for Florida heading into this game. And I would not be surprised if Arch Manning takes advantage of a beat-up Florida secondary. And I also wouldn't be surprised if Florida's offense still struggles to execute, even though DJ Lagway got that development time this past week. I haven't seen it happen at the rate that many people were expecting. It's kind of one of those fool me 3 times type things. I got to see it to believe that Lagway is able to perform at the rate that he showcased last season.
All right, Graham, where do you feel like that Florida could potentially take advantage of Texas if there is anywhere?
Yeah, the run game. I think that for Florida, they need to do a better job establishing the run, and they have talent there. They have a good offensive line, and they have a really, really dynamic running back in Jaden Baugh. If they can take some of the pressure off of DJ Lagway, make it so that Florida can, not be one-dimensional offensively and establish the run and break a couple big runs, then Florida, I think, could absolutely have their chances to be successful and put some points up on this Texas defense. That is a huge thing for Florida in this game. Again, they had 200 yards rushing, more than 200 yards rushing a season ago in Texas when the passing game struggled with Aiden Warner. Established the run in this game. And I also think that Florida can potentially win the turnover battle. Arch Manning still has a lot of work to do. Let me just say this real quick. Every sophomore quarterback and every first-year full-time starter has a lot of work to do. I hope that people moving forward are going to be a little bit more hesitant to proclaim these guys as potential Heisman Trophy candidates when they haven't started a full season at their programs, which is the case with Arch Manning, and it certainly is the case with DJ Lagway. These guys are going to ideally play 15 years at quarterback the rest of their careers, and expecting them as 20-year-olds to be able to make every single correct decision and read defenses and have the pocket presence that guys at the next level have, or even quarterbacks who are 23, 24 years old in this post-COVID era. It's kind of unrealistic. The Tim Tebows and the Johnny Manziels are so few and far between that expecting a sophomore to be a Heisman Trophy candidate is often wishful thinking, if not ignorant in a sense. So I do think that Florida, their defense can take advantage of Arch Manning, get some takeaways. Cormani McClain is going to step into that role for Dijon Johnson with Johnson out for the season. And Cormani had an interception on the lone pass thrown in his direction at Miami. If Florida can force Manning into some bad decisions, then I think that the Gators are going to have a chance to exploit that. But they're going to need to get some help from their pass rush. That is probably one of the other big questions for Florida heading into this game. They just have 3 sacks on the season. That is in the 130s of 136 FBS teams. That is putrid, quite honestly. And they need to do a better job at getting pressure on the quarterback to force a guy like Arch Manning into those decisions. But if Florida can get the pressure that we have heard that they've been able to get in practice and win the turnover battle and establish the run offensively, I think Florida could be in this game in the second half and have their chances to secure the upset against a really, really good Texas team.
Yeah, you hit something right there talking about pressuring Arch Manning. I saw a stat here not too long ago. He's only completing something like 20-something% or 30-something% of his passes when under pressure, not being sacked, just under pressure. And so, Florida's, pass defense really has to put the pressure on Manning if they want to see success. Flipping to the other side, let's talk about the Florida quarterback really quick. DJ Lagway, what is the latest? How healthy is he? I know he's had an off week, but what's going on with Lagway? Because he does not seem to be himself at all out there on the field. Hasn't looked that way the entire season, not for a quarter. Is it pain? Is it something, is there a catch? What is it? Is it a muscle pull? What's going on with DJ Lagway?
Yeah, I think simply it's just a lack of development time. I mean, the guy wasn't able to do much for the past 9 months and had so much to improve upon. And he's also altered his throwing motion a little bit, potentially to take away from the risk of hindering his shoulder that he dealt with for the past year, dating back to fall camp last year. And he looks like a guy who doesn't look as comfortable taking those deep shots. They don't look as fluid and as natural for him as they did last season. And then I think the other part of it is that, DJ Lagway is closer to a household name right now. He's not just the former 5-star quarterback when he got to Florida last year. There's game film out there on him now. Teams know how to play him. They're dropping 3 into coverage, playing 2 underneath, and forcing him to read his own defense and make the correct decision. And again, everything I just said about sophomore quarterbacks, that's incredibly difficult to do. And when you see a player who can do it, you can sit there and rightfully praise them and say, wow, this is someone who is advanced in their knowledge of the game, not just a natural impressive athlete like DJ Lagway. It's someone who has mastered or is close to mastering the cerebral aspects of the game. That's something that he needs to work on, and teams know what he struggles with, and they're adjusting their defensive scheme accordingly. So it's a combination of his health, the changes that he made, the need for further improved footwork, and also teams just understand his shortcomings and how to game plan against him better than they did at this time last year when he still was fairly unknown and you had him as the backup quarterback. And then he was able to have an impressive finish to the season. But those were really results that came in November. Now teams have had 9 months to prepare for this guy on their schedule, and they have taken advantage more often than not as a result.
So how do you see it playing out Saturday as Texas invades Gainesville for the first time in 85 years? Texas or the Gators?
Yeah, I'm going Texas. As everything I just said about Florida, the issues they're dealing with defensively, Lagway's shortcomings so far, I think it's a little bit too much to overcome, even though I think that Ben Hill Griffin Stadium is going to cause some problems for Texas's offense. Until I see Florida's offense come out and be explosive and attack and execute drives and move the chains and take advantage of any shortcomings that Texas has, I can't sit here and be optimistic that it's going to occur. I do think that due to the situations both defenses are dealing with, Texas missing a key guy in the secondary, Florida missing key guys in the secondary, that both quarterbacks are going to have chances to be explosive. And I actually think this game is going to be a little bit more higher scoring than a lot of people project due to just some broken plays, miscommunications, whatever it is. I think that this is going to be a game that I went 31-17 in my prediction. I think Florida's going to get a rushing touchdown. I think Lagway's going to connect with one through the air. Florida's going to get a field goal, but I do think that Arch Manning is probably just in a better position right now to be successful than DJ Lagway is. I could see them also getting a defensive touchdown. This is going to be a game that I see Texas pulling away in the third quarter, and Florida's going to have their chances, in my opinion, in the second half before faltering down the stretch, kind of in similar fashion to that Miami loss. I don't think that the frustrations are going to evaporate in Gainesville after Saturday. I do think that Texas wins in a 31-17 contest, but I also could see a low-scoring affair. I could see a game that is sitting here at 3-0 at halftime, and people are saying it's a quote-unquote defensive battle with two quarterbacks who are just showcasing their rate of development thus far. Second-year guys, first full season as starters, a lot of experienced talent on defense for both teams. If that is what occurs here, Florida's going to have their chances in the game, but I think it's going to be a little bit higher scoring than a lot of people think, and I think Texas prevails and improves to 4-1 after Saturday.
Graham, I want to get your thoughts on the stat that I saw this morning. Texas is ranked 103rd on third down with their offense. Florida, 123rd. What in the world is going on with third down in the Gator offense?
Well, I think that someone needs to ask the NIL collectives how much they're paying the punters, because they probably should pay them a little bit more for how much they're going out there. I do think that for Florida specifically, they've had too many procedural penalties to execute on drives. They've had too many false starts, they've had too many holding calls, and they faced third and long too often, haven't been great on first and second down, and then they haven't been able to move the chains. I think for Texas, you're seeing a quarterback who is still struggling to make decisions, but also he's going to have to do it more himself than I think Texas would like him to do. Texas is missing their top two running backs in CJ Baxter and Travion Wisner. This is a situation where both teams are banged up offensively, and the quarterbacks, young guys, are being asked to do a ton of it, and they're just getting stopped by really, really good defenses. I mean, Florida has faced some really good defenses so far this season. Miami had the number one run defense heading into that game. LSU has a really good defense. They had the number one transfer portal class, and they got to the quarterback consistently. Now Texas, defensively, a really, really good team. I think they're hovering around 30th or something like that in some of the stats. It's better than that, in my opinion. I do think that this is going to be a defensive battle here in the game, and whichever team can get more takeaways and get the opposing offense off the field on third down is going to put themselves in the best position to be successful in this game. But you look at the third down conversion percentage. If I'm Steve Sarkisian and I'm Billy Napier, I'm looking at it and saying that is one of the main culprits of where we're at right now. And it's something that absolutely needs to improve if we're going to have a chance to reach our goals at the end of the season, which right now are far more attainable for Texas than the Gators.
Graham, look, man, enjoy covering the Florida Gators and the Texas Longhorns this weekend. Thank you for this interview, and we will catch up with you later on to continue to talk about the Florida Gators.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me. Hope all is well out there. Looking forward to a great game on Saturday.
Take care, Graham.
Thank you, Heath. Good seeing you, Stephen.
All right. Go Gators, man. All right, so that is going to wrap up our preview show there of the Longhorns and the Gators. Heath, how do you see this playing out? I'm going to actually lean a little bit towards the Gators here because I'm not sold on Texas's offense. What say you?
Ooh, man. I mean, what did Arkansas and State play to a 7-3 final 2 years ago? And,
Yeah.
of course, the famous 3-2 Auburn-Mississippi State game years ago. We might get a 10-7 game. We might get a 14-13. I do think that this is a one-score game unless there's a defensive or special team score.
Yeah.
A scoop and score, block punt, something like that. I think this is going to be a one-score game.
Yeah.
So, Stephen, I ask you the question every week. I'm going to do it now. My 3 famous questions when we go into games. Which team has the better quarterback, DJ Lagway or Arch Manning?
I'm going to say Lagway. Shocker, but I'm going to say Lagway.
Well, he's got a little bit more experience.
Yeah.
All right. Who has the better coach?
I'm going with Sark.
All right.
Because he's done more.
He has done a lot more. Billy Napier's won at a super high level, has done it at smaller schools, where Sark has done it, USC, he's done it at Washington, he's done it at Texas. So, and I agree with you on both those answers. And so what's always the tiebreaker? Which team's playing at home?
Florida.
Yeah, so it's in the swamp. So that makes sense, Stephen. It makes sense. This game's going to be ugly. It's going to be ugly. If this game turns out to be a 44-41 final, like everybody in the world will be shocked. But you know what else is going to happen? Everybody in the world will be happy because finally DJ Lagway has come out of a shell, and so has Arch Manning, and they figured things out, and those teams will be humming. I really think with Arch Manning, I really do think this. I think he has not figured it out yet, and once he does, he will start progressing.
Right.
DJ Lagway, I just think it's a health issue with DJ Lagway.
Yeah.
I really do. We saw flashes of him last year, and I just think there's something not right with the guy. I don't know if it's a muscle pull, if it's a tendon, if it's, sore muscle, whatever. I just don't think he's healthy, and I think they're hiding that.
And Heath, I don't know if you watched the LSU and Florida game a couple of weeks ago, but after that 5th interception, he walked off the field. That was DJ Lagway, and acted like he wanted to throw his helmet and give up. He was just like, that look on his face was like, I am so miserable here at Florida.
Well, in the heat of the moment, I think every player in every position at every school, I think that happens at times.
Yeah.
Either you're getting whipped up front and the lineman's just like, I can't take this anymore, or if it's, whatever it might be, a receiver dropping, or they're not throwing to him when he's wide open and he's losing his mind about it.
Yeah.
Or a quarterback throwing interceptions. I'm kind of with you on that. But nothing shocks me anymore in college football, not one single thing. I mean, Stephen, here's a crazy, wild scenario I just dreamed up on the spot. Let's just say Dan Mullen gets the job at Arkansas and DJ Lagway jumps in the portal and goes to Arkansas, and Dan Mullen makes him the quarterback that we all thought he could be. I mean, it's crazier things have happened. Yeah. I don't think that will happen. But what if that did happen? What if Arkansas really does hire Dan Mullen and he gets a quarterback? We all know Dan Mullen works magic with his quarterbacks. He always has, always will. And could you imagine the quick turnaround that would happen Wow.
Well, I mean, Florida did lose a quarterback here recently to Arkansas, Felipe Franks.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen, with NIL and transfer portal, nothing surprises me anymore.
Yep.
The NCAA doesn't have a backbone until they get one and figure this out. Get a commissioner of college football.
Yep.
Until it happens, we're not. This is not going to be solved anytime soon, and nothing will surprise me at all.
All right. So that is going to wrap up the Thursday evening edition of the Stingray Show. When we come back on Friday, we are going to be joined by Adam Rittenberg, senior writer for ESPN, and Heath and I will go over all of the games this weekend and continue our talks of college football. That is on the Friday evening edition of the Stingray Show. We will see you right back here at 6 p.m. right here on the radio, and we will have Adam Rittenberg join us then.
What time, Stephen?
6.
6, 7. Okay.
6 p.m.